I was 29 when I realized that some people don't actually want you to succeed. Not really. They want you close enough to admire, useful enough to rely on, but never confident enough to leave them behind. And the worst part is, sometimes those people are your own family. My name is Nathan Cole. And for most of my life I played the role everyone expected from me. Responsible son. Reliable older brother. The quiet one who fixed problems, paid bills on time, and never made scenes at family dinners. My younger brother Ryan was the opposite. Ryan was loud where I was reserved, charming where I was awkward, reckless where I was careful. Somehow people loved him for it, especially our parents. Growing up, it always felt like Ryan lived under a spotlight while I stood just outside of it, clapping politely from the dark. When Ryan got suspended in high school for crashing his friend's car, my parents called it a learning experience. When I stayed up every night for weeks helping my father with bookkeeping because his small construction company was struggling, nobody even mentioned it. That was just Nathan being Nathan. Dependable. Predictable. Easy to overlook. I convinced myself for years that it didn't bother me. I focused on work instead. I graduated with an information systems degree, got a job at a software company in Chicago, and slowly worked my way up from junior analyst to project manager. It wasn't glamorous, but I was proud of it. The company specialized in logistics software for manufacturing firms. Most people would probably fall asleep hearing about it, but I liked the structure of it. Systems made sense to me in a way people often didn't. You put in the work and eventually results came out. At least that's what I believed back then. Ryan drifted between jobs every year or two. Marketing assistant. Real estate trainee. Crypto startup consultant. Every new title sounded impressive until you looked closely enough to realize it meant almost nothing. Still, every family gathering somehow became a celebration of Ryan's potential. My mother would beam while talking about how ambitious he was. My father loved telling people Ryan had entrepreneur energy. Meanwhile, if anyone asked about me, the answer was always something like, "Nathan's still at that tech company." Still. As if stability was embarrassing. I tolerated it for years because confrontation exhausted me. I told myself family dynamics were messy for everyone. I told myself I was lucky to even have parents who cared at all. But small things add up. The comments. The comparisons. The way people slowly teach you that your accomplishments matter less because you don't package them loudly enough. When I was 28, my team landed the biggest client contract in company history. I had spent 6 months leading that project. Late nights. Weekend calls. Emergency revisions at 2 in the morning. When the deal finally closed, our department director personally congratulated me in front of the entire office. 2 weeks later, I got promoted to senior operations lead. It was the first time in years I genuinely felt proud of myself. That same weekend, my parents hosted a family barbecue. I remember standing in the backyard holding a paper plate while Ryan talked about a business podcast he wanted to start. He had no equipment, no plan, and no actual experience, but my parents listened like he was unveiling the next billion-dollar company. Finally, my mother looked at me. "And how's work going, Nathan?" I smiled a little. "Pretty good, actually. I got promoted last week." "Oh," she said distractedly. "That's nice." Then she turned back to Ryan before I could even answer the follow-up question she never asked. I wish I could say that moment devastated me. It didn't. That would have required surprise. The real damage came later that night when I caught myself wondering why I still cared. I was nearly 30 years old, financially independent, respected at work, living in my own apartment downtown, and somehow one indifferent sentence from my mother could still ruin my mood for hours. That realization stayed with me. A month later, everything changed. Our company lost a vice president unexpectedly after a competitor poached him. Leadership started restructuring departments fast. And because of the client contract I'd led, my name suddenly carried weight internally. One Thursday morning, I got called into a meeting with our COO. I honestly thought I was in trouble. Instead, she offered me a director position overseeing a new expansion team in Seattle. Higher salary. Stock options. A relocation package that made my head spin. I sat there staring at her for several seconds before asking if she was serious. She laughed. "Nathan, half the reason we're expanding is because of the systems you built." Of course I'm serious. I accepted before I could talk myself out of it. For the first time in my life, I chose myself immediately instead of worrying how other people would react. The move happened fast. Within 6 weeks, I was living in a high-rise apartment overlooking Elliott Bay, managing a team of 30 people, and attending meetings with executives I used to feel intimidated just emailing. It was terrifying and exhilarating. Something shifted in me during those first few months in Seattle. People there didn't know the quiet version of Nathan that my family had spent years reducing me to. They only knew the version who solved problems efficiently and spoke with confidence in meetings. And strangely enough, the more people respected me professionally, the easier it became to see how little respect I'd accepted personally. I started setting boundaries, calling my parents less, ignoring Ryan's random requests for money, not rearranging my schedule every time family demanded something. First, nobody seemed to notice. Then Thanksgiving approached. My mother insisted I fly home. "You've barely visited since the move," she guilted over the phone. "Families shouldn't drift apart like this." Against my better judgment, I agreed. The dinner started normally enough. Turkey, wine, Ryan arriving 40 minutes late wearing an expensive coat he definitely couldn't afford. At some point, my father asked about Seattle, and I mentioned that our division had just closed another major contract. Before I could finish explaining it, Ryan laughed. "Man, Nathan always talks about work like he's saving the world." A few people chuckled. I forced a smile. Then Ryan added, "You know what your problem is? You take yourself too seriously." I looked at him calmly. "And you don't take anything seriously enough." The table went quiet for a second. Ryan smirked like I'd confirmed some private joke. "There he is," he said. "Corporate Nathan." I waited for anyone to tell him to stop. Nobody did. My mother just sighed dramatically. "Can we not argue for one dinner?" That sentence hit harder than anything Ryan said. Because somehow the problem wasn't him humiliating me constantly. The problem was me reacting to it. I barely spoke the rest of the evening. Later that night, while helping clean dishes in the kitchen, I overheard my parents talking quietly in the dining room. My father laughed softly and said, "Ryan just has that natural charisma. Nathan never really learned how to connect with people the same way." I stood frozen beside the sink. Not because it hurt, because suddenly everything finally made sense. They genuinely believed that. To them, Ryan's confidence mattered more than my consistency. His charm outweighed my reliability. His potential would always be more exciting than my results. And once I understood that, something inside me went completely still. Not angry, not emotional, just finished. The next morning, I left before breakfast. I ignored my mother's texts asking why I'd gone so early. Back in Seattle, I buried myself in work again. 2 months later, I was invited to speak at a national technology leadership conference in San Francisco. It was a massive opportunity. Industry executives, investors, startup founders, media coverage. Our company even announced my appearance publicly on LinkedIn. The post performed better than anyone expected. Thousands of views. Hundreds of comments. Former coworkers reaching out to congratulate me, including Ryan. His message was short. "Big shot now, huh?" I didn't respond. A week later, my mother called. For the first time in years, she sounded unusually warm. "Nathan," she said carefully, "Ryan mentioned he might attend that conference too. Maybe you boys could reconnect a little." Something about her tone immediately raised alarms in my head. "What do you mean attend?" "Oh, just networking," she said quickly. "You know your brother. He's trying to build connections." I stared out the window of my office, because suddenly I knew exactly what was about to happen. And deep down, I already knew Ryan wasn't going there to reconnect with me. He was going there to use me. The conference hotel overlooked the bay. All glass walls and polished marble floors designed to make ambitious people feel important. I arrived the evening before my panel and checked in under the company reservation. The lobby buzzed with founders, recruiters, engineers, and investors pretending not to evaluate each other every second. I should have been focused on my presentation. Instead, I kept thinking about Ryan, about my mother's strange phone call, about that instinctive feeling that something was wrong. The next morning confirmed it. I was grabbing coffee near the registration area when I heard someone behind me say my last name. "Cole? Wait, are you related to Ryan Cole?" I turned around. A man in his 40s wearing a venture capital badge smiled politely. Your brother and I spoke last night at the networking mixer, he explained. Interesting guy. Every muscle in my body tightened. What exactly did he say? The man shrugged casually. That you two were working together on some consulting projects. He mentioned helping your company scale operations. I stared at him. Ryan had never worked a single day for my company. Not one. I forced a calm smile. There's been a misunderstanding. The investor looked confused but nodded awkwardly before walking away. I stood there gripping my coffee cup hard enough to hurt my hand, and suddenly all the pieces clicked together. Ryan wasn't attending as a guest. He was pretending to be connected to me professionally. I immediately walked to the registration desk. Can you tell me if Ryan Cole checked in? The woman typed for a moment. Yes, she said. Media pass. Media. Of course. Probably fake. I thanked her and walked away before my temper showed on my face. For the next hour I tried focusing on my panel preparation, but my concentration kept slipping. Every scenario played through my mind at once. Was he using my name casually? Exaggerating his connection to me? Or something worse? I found out 30 minutes before my panel. I was backstage reviewing notes when one of the event coordinators approached me carefully. Hey Nathan, she said. Quick question. Is your brother joining you for the session? I looked up sharply. What? Ryan Cole, she clarified. He mentioned he might come on stage during audience questions since you've collaborated together. For a second I genuinely thought I misheard her. We have never collaborated professionally, I said flatly. Her expression changed immediately. Oh, that single word carried enough understanding to make my stomach turn. I took a slow breath. What exactly has he been telling people? She hesitated. That he helped advise some of your expansion strategies. That you've been mentoring him in tech consulting. I laughed once under my breath. Not because it was funny. Because it was unbelievable. Or at least it should have been. But the truth was, Ryan had always survived by attaching himself to other people's accomplishments. In college he copied assignments from roommates then charmed professors into overlooking it. At jobs he took credit for group work constantly. And at home my parents defended him every single time. He just sells himself confidently. That was always the excuse. As if dishonesty became ambition when packaged attractively enough. The coordinator looked uncomfortable. Do you want security involved? I thought about it for a moment. Then I shook my head. No, not yet. Because public humiliation wasn't actually what I wanted. What I wanted was clarity. A clean line in the sand. No more minimizing. No more pretending. No more protecting him from consequences. The panel itself went perfectly. Ironically, it was probably the best presentation I'd ever given. I spoke about operational growth, leadership under pressure, and building systems that scale sustainably. But beneath all the business language, part of me was speaking about something else entirely. Respect. Integrity. Earning trust instead of performing confidence. The audience responded immediately. People laughed at the right moments. Took notes. Asked thoughtful questions. When the session ended, several executives approached me afterward wanting to continue conversations privately. One of them was the CEO of a rapidly growing software firm in Austin. Another invited me to a leadership retreat in New York. For the first time in years, I felt completely certain of my own value without needing anyone else to confirm it. Then I saw Ryan across the ballroom. He stood near the bar laughing with two attendees while holding court like he belonged there. Expensive jacket. Perfect smile. Total confidence. And absolutely no shame. The worst part? Most people probably believed him. Because Ryan understood something dangerous about human nature. Confidence often matters more than truth during first impressions. He noticed me watching. Grinned immediately. Then walked over like nothing was wrong. Nate, he said loudly, clapping my shoulder. Great panel. I stepped back slightly. What are you doing here, Ryan? Networking. He smirked. Relax. You're lying to people. His expression barely changed. I'm making connections. You told event staff we worked together. Well, technically we're brothers. I stared at him in disbelief. That's your defense? Ryan rolled his eyes dramatically. You always do this. Do what? Act morally superior because you climbed some corporate ladder. I lowered my voice carefully. You are using my reputation to impress strangers. And, he snapped quietly, you think you got where you are alone? That sentence hit harder than I expected. Not because it was true, because he genuinely believed it. Ryan leaned closer. You know what your problem is? You've always acted like success belongs to whoever works hardest. That's not how the world works anymore. I looked at him steadily. No. Success belongs to people who can sustain reality longer than performance. He laughed mockingly. Jesus, you sound like a podcast. I should have walked away immediately. Instead, I asked the question I already knew the answer to. How much have you told people? Ryan shrugged. Enough. Enough meaning what? That I consult independently. That I know people in the industry. That my brother runs expansion strategy for one of the fastest growing tech divisions on the West Coast. My jaw tightened. You realize that sounds like official affiliation. It's networking, Nathan. Everybody exaggerates. No, I said quietly. Not everybody. For the first time his smile weakened slightly. There it was. The tiny crack underneath all the confidence. Ryan depended on people doubting themselves more than doubting him. But I wasn't doubting myself anymore. You need to stop, I said calmly. Or what? I held his gaze for several seconds, then answered honestly. Or eventually someone's going to expose you. Ryan smirked again, but it looked less certain now. You won't. That sentence told me everything. He still thought I was the same person. Still thought I'd stay quiet to keep peace. Still thought protecting family mattered more to me than protecting myself. He was wrong. That evening I skipped the after-party and went straight to my hotel room. I sat alone by the window overlooking the city lights while replaying every interaction from the day. At some point my phone buzzed. A LinkedIn notification. Ryan Cole updated his profile. I opened it. My stomach dropped instantly. Under professional experience, Ryan had added, strategic technology consultant. Collaborated with enterprise leadership teams on operational scaling initiatives. And beneath it, featured participant, West Coast Leadership Innovation Summit. No direct mention of me. Nothing technically illegal. Just carefully designed lies wrapped around fragments of truth. Enough ambiguity to sound believable. Enough distance to deny everything later. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then another notification appeared. Someone had tagged both of us in a photo from the conference with the caption, "Great meeting the Cole brothers. Impressive minds." That's when I finally understood the real problem. Ryan wasn't borrowing my reputation temporarily. He was building an identity out of proximity to my success. And unless I stopped it now, it would only escalate. The next morning, before my flight back to Seattle, I scheduled a private meeting with our legal department. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I finally understood something important. If someone keeps crossing boundaries without consequences, eventually they stop seeing boundaries at all. And Ryan had just crossed directly into my professional life. This time I wasn't going to clean up after him quietly. When I returned to Seattle, I expected to feel angry. Instead, I felt strangely calm. Like something had finally become clear. For years I'd treated Ryan's behavior like a personality flaw. Annoying, immature, selfish maybe, but manageable. Something temporary he would eventually grow out of once real adulthood hit him hard enough. But sitting in that legal meeting Monday morning, watching screenshots of his fake consulting claims projected onto a conference room monitor, I realized the truth. Ryan wasn't confused. He wasn't lost. He was deliberate. Every vague title, every exaggerated story, every strategic half-truth. It was all intentional. Our legal advisor, Melissa, adjusted her glasses while reviewing the documents I'd brought. Has he directly claimed employment with the company? She asked. Not explicitly, I said. But he heavily implies it. She nodded slowly. That's usually how people avoid liability. Ambiguity. I almost laughed. That word described Ryan perfectly. Ambiguity. Never fully lying. Never fully honest. Always leaving himself escape routes. Melissa continued scrolling through his LinkedIn profile. He's using conference photos connected to your company branding, she said carefully. That creates reputational risk if clients assume endorsement. Exactly. That was the part Ryan didn't understand. Maybe pretending to be successful impressed strangers temporarily. But once business reputations became involved, consequences changed. Companies protected themselves aggressively. And unlike family, corporations didn't tolerate manipulation because someone was just being ambitious. Melissa looked up. We can issue a formal warning. I thought about it for several seconds, then shook my head. Not yet, because something deeper still bothered me. A warning wouldn't change Ryan. He would apologize temporarily, disappear for a few months, then reinvent the same behavior somewhere else. No, for the first time in my life, I didn't want another quiet resolution. I wanted truth exposed fully. Not out of cruelty, out of necessity. Over the next 2 weeks, small things started surfacing naturally. A recruiter messaged me privately asking whether Ryan genuinely consulted with enterprise clients because his experience seemed inconsistent. A startup founder mentioned Ryan had referenced family partnerships during a networking dinner. Then came the email that changed everything. One Friday afternoon, my assistant forwarded me a message from a small software company in Portland requesting a follow-up call regarding Ryan Cole's recommendations. I didn't recognize the company name at all. I called them immediately. The owner sounded relieved when I introduced myself. Great, he said. Ryan told us you were overseeing the integration personally. My chest tightened. What integration? There was silence. Then confusion. The logistics platform upgrade? He said your company could streamline our operations. I closed my office door slowly. How much money have you paid him? Another pause. $10,000 up front. I sat down heavily. Ryan had crossed from exaggeration into fraud. Real money. Real clients. Real damage. And somehow, unbelievably, he had dragged my name directly into it. The owner emailed me copies of their agreement while we spoke. The documents were sloppy but polished enough to fool inexperienced businesses. Ryan had built fake proposal templates using language stolen, almost word for word from public materials on our corporate website. Even worse, he had listed me as a senior strategic advisor. I stared at my own name on the page for several seconds. That was the exact moment my remaining guilt disappeared completely. Not anger. Not resentment. Guilt. Because some part of me had still protected Ryan mentally. Still viewed him as family first. But family doesn't use your identity to scam people. I forwarded everything to Melissa immediately. Her response came 10 minutes later. This is serious. By Monday morning, our legal department opened a formal investigation. What shocked me most wasn't the evidence itself. It was how much evidence existed. Once people started looking, everything unraveled fast. Ryan's consulting website contained fake testimonials. One client photo belonged to a dentist in Arizona completely unrelated to tech. Several business logos displayed on his homepage had no connection to him whatsoever. Even the industry podcast appearances he bragged about turned out to be tiny unpaid online interviews with almost no audience. His entire professional image was basically scaffolding with no building behind it. And somehow my parents had believed every word. Or maybe they simply wanted to. That thought stayed with me constantly. Because denial becomes easier when someone tells you the version of reality you prefer hearing. 3 days later, my mother called unexpectedly. I answered this time. Nathan, she began nervously. Ryan says your company is threatening him. I leaned back slowly in my chair. He used my name in fraudulent business agreements. He said it's all a misunderstanding. Did he show you the contracts? Silence. Of course he hadn't. He's under a lot of pressure right now, she said softly. There it was again. Protection. Excuses. Deflection. Even now. I closed my eyes briefly. Mom, he accepted money from businesses while pretending to have professional partnerships that don't exist. He admires you, she whispered suddenly. That sentence hit me harder than yelling would have. Because for years that's exactly how they rationalized everything Ryan did. Not manipulation. Admiration. Not copying. Looking up to me. As if intent erased consequences. I spoke carefully. No. Admiration doesn't involve using someone's identity for personal gain. My mother sounded close to tears. You know your brother struggles with confidence. I almost laughed from disbelief. Ryan, the loudest person in every room? Then I realized something important. Confidence and self-worth are not the same thing. Ryan performed confidence constantly because underneath it, there was nothing stable holding him together. Every exaggerated story, every fake achievement, every borrowed credential. He needed strangers to believe he mattered because deep down he didn't believe it himself. And my parents had spent years feeding that cycle instead of stopping it. But understanding someone doesn't excuse them. I ended the call politely. Afterward, I sat quietly in my office watching rain hit the windows for a long time. Oddly enough, I didn't feel victorious. Just tired. That evening, Melissa sent me another update. One of Ryan's clients had threatened legal action after discovering the truth independently. Apparently, Ryan promised software capabilities that didn't even exist. Worse, he'd taken advance payments from at least 3 small companies. The situation escalated quickly after that. Conference organizers quietly revoked his future event access. LinkedIn removed several misleading claims from his profile after receiving formal complaints. One networking group banned him entirely. And suddenly people who once praised his charisma started calling him what he actually was. Dishonest. Funny how quickly perception changes once evidence appears. Then came the article. A business journalist covering startup culture published an investigative piece about fake consultants exploiting tech networking spaces. Ryan wasn't the only example mentioned, but he was the main one. The article included screenshots, fabricated credentials, copied branding, and anonymous quotes from people he misled professionally. My name wasn't included directly, but anyone who knew us understood immediately. The story spread fast, especially locally. By the next morning, my phone contained 14 missed calls from family members. I ignored all of them, except one. My father. I answered mostly out of curiosity. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he sighed heavily. You should have handled this privately. I stared at the skyline outside my apartment. That sentence told me everything. Not, Ryan shouldn't have done this. Not, we're sorry. Not, are you okay? Just criticism for exposing reality. Something inside me finally detached completely in that moment. I handled it professionally, I said calmly. He's your brother. And I was his target. Silence. Then my father said quietly, you always take things too far once your feelings get involved. I actually smiled, because for the first time in my life that sentence no longer hurt me. It sounded small, weak, outdated. Like hearing opinions from people who still thought they understood a version of me that no longer existed. I'm not emotional anymore, I told him honestly. That's the difference. Then I hung up. That night I stood alone on my apartment balcony overlooking Seattle while cold wind rolled off the water below. And for the first time in years I felt completely free of them emotionally. Not healed. Not happy. But untangled. There's a difference. I finally understood that my entire life I'd been waiting for acknowledgement from people emotionally incapable of giving it fairly. Nothing I accomplished would have changed that. Not promotions. Not money. Not success. Because the issue was never my worth. It was the role they assigned me long ago. And roles threaten people when they change. A week later, Ryan sent me a message. Just one sentence. You ruined my life. I stared at it for a while before locking my phone. Because the truth was simpler than that. Ryan ruined his own life. I just stopped protecting the illusion. 3 months passed after the article. 3 quiet, strangely peaceful months. No family calls. No awkward messages. No forced apologies wrapped in excuses. At first the silence felt heavy. Then gradually it became something else. Relief. I focused entirely on work. Our expansion division continued growing faster than projected. And leadership approved a massive new partnership with a European logistics firm. Suddenly I was traveling constantly New York, Toronto, Amsterdam. For the first time in my life, my energy went toward building my future instead of managing other people's chaos. And the strangest part? Without the constant emotional exhaustion from my family, everything in my life improved. I slept better. Thought more clearly. Even my team noticed the difference. One afternoon my operations manager, Claire, stopped by my office after a meeting. "You seem lighter lately," she said casually. I almost laughed, because lighter was exactly the right word. Like I'd spent years carrying emotional weight that was never mine to begin with. That evening I walked home through downtown Seattle, while rain reflected neon lights across the sidewalks. The city felt alive around me. Restaurants buzzing, traffic humming, strangers rushing toward lives I knew nothing about. And for once I didn't feel lonely inside crowds anymore. I felt separate, independent, whole. Then December arrived. And with it came the annual company holiday gala. Normally I hated corporate events, but this year felt different. Our division had exceeded every performance target, and several executives hinted there would be major leadership announcements before the new year. The gala took place in a renovated art museum overlooking the water. Live jazz played softly through the building while executives wandered between open bars and catered tables pretending not to discuss business. Around 9 o'clock, our CEO stepped onto the stage for announcements. I expected generic speeches. Instead, halfway through the presentation, she smiled directly toward my table. "And finally," she said, "this year's Leadership Excellence Award goes to someone who transformed not only operations but company culture." My stomach dropped immediately. Nathan Cole. For a second the room blurred slightly around me. Then people started clapping. Loudly. Claire practically shoved me out of my chair laughing while coworkers patted my back. As I walked toward the stage, something strange happened. I didn't think about my parents. Not once. A year earlier, that moment would have immediately triggered the same old instinct. I wish they could see this. But standing under those lights while hundreds of people applauded sincerely, I realized I no longer needed the people who refused to value me to confirm my worth. That realization mattered more than the award itself. After the speech, several executives stayed late talking with me about future leadership plans. One hinted openly at a vice president track within 2 years. Another offered introductions to investors starting a new venture fund. The opportunities felt endless suddenly. Not because I had changed overnight, because I finally stopped shrinking myself psychologically. Around midnight I stepped outside onto the museum terrace for air. Snow flurries drifted lightly over the harbor below. That's when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Normally I wouldn't answer. For some reason I did. "Nathan." "Ryan." His voice sounded different immediately. Quieter. Older somehow. "What do you want?" I asked calmly. There was a long pause. Then he said something I never expected to hear. "I think you were right about me." I leaned against the railing silently. "I kept pretending," he continued softly. "And after a while I didn't even know who I actually was anymore." Part of me wanted to stay angry. Honestly, it would have been easier. But exhaustion sounded real in his voice now. Not performative. Not charming. Just tired. "I lost everything," he admitted quietly. "Ashley left. Dad barely talks to me. Mom acts nervous around me all the time now." I stared out across the dark water. For years I imagined this conversation happening differently. I imagined satisfaction. Vindication. Instead I mostly felt sad. Not for the version of Ryan who manipulated people. For the younger version. The insecure kid underneath all the performance who learned somewhere along the way that appearing impressive mattered more than becoming genuine. "We all make choices," I said finally. "I know." Another silence stretched between us. Then Ryan laughed weakly. "You know what's funny?" "What?" "You were always the person I copied most." That hit me harder than I expected. Because suddenly I saw it clearly. The reason Ryan attached himself to my accomplishments wasn't hatred. It was emptiness. I had spent years believing my family valued him more. Maybe in some ways they did. But Ryan himself had spent those same years measuring himself against me constantly. Trying to imitate stability without building it. Trying to imitate respect without earning it. "You should probably stop copying people," I said quietly. For the first time I'll call, he laughed genuinely. "Yeah," he admitted. "Probably." We talked for another 10 minutes. Nothing dramatic. No emotional reunion. No movie-style reconciliation. Just honesty. Real honesty for the first time in our lives. Before hanging up, Ryan hesitated. "I really am sorry, Nate." I closed my eyes briefly, then answered truthfully, I know. After the call ended, I stayed outside a while longer watching snow drift across the city, and I realized forgiveness feels different than people describe it. It isn't forgetting. It isn't excusing. It isn't suddenly trusting someone again. Forgiveness is simply deciding someone else's damage no longer controls your inner life. That's all. A week before Christmas, my mother sent me a long email. Not defensive. Not manipulative. Just honest. She admitted they treated Ryan differently for years because they worried about him more. He demanded attention constantly while I seemed self-sufficient, so eventually they stopped checking whether I needed support too. We thought strength meant you needed less love, she wrote. That sentence broke my heart a little, because I think a lot of families work exactly that way. The dependable child becomes invisible precisely because they survive quietly. I didn't respond immediately, but I did respond eventually. Not because everything was fixed, because boundaries and forgiveness can exist together. That was something else I finally learned. By spring, life looked completely different. Ryan got a legitimate sales job at a small software company. Entry level. No fake titles. No pretending. Just real work. Apparently he hated it at first, then slowly got better at it. Meanwhile, I continued growing inside the company faster than I ever expected. My confidence no longer depended on external approval, because I had finally separated my identity from other people's opinions. And once that happens, everything changes. About a year after the conference disaster, I visited Chicago again for the first time. Family dinner felt awkward initially, but different too. Quieter. More honest. Nobody mocked my career anymore. Nobody interrupted me constantly. Nobody treated Ryan like a golden child either. Reality had finally entered the room. At one point during dessert, my father looked at me carefully and said, "You built a good life for yourself, Nathan." Simple sentence. Probably 10 years too late. But this time I didn't ache hearing it, because I no longer needed it desperately. I just nodded and said, "Thanks." And that was enough. Later that night, driving back to my hotel through snowy streets, I thought about how badly I once wanted revenge. Back then I imagined winning would feel loud, explosive, satisfying. But real victory turned out to be much quieter than that. It was waking up without resentment. It was succeeding without needing to prove anything. It was learning that self-respect matters more than validation. And most importantly, it was understanding that sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is stop begging to be valued by people determined not to understand them. Because once you finally choose yourself fully, the people who underestimated you lose their power forever.